So this is part 2 of a 2-part essay designed to explore the relationship the writer-director James Gunn has to superheroes through the lens of the movies that he has both written and directed pertaining to such. In part 1, I talk about his movie Super from 2010, and break down why I think that movie serves as evidence that Gunn was once rather cautious to promote a celebration of the genre. That the image of a superhero as an effective narrative device and a positive role model to its key demographic is inherently flawed and morally reckless. I seconded that notion with the counterpoint that the types of characters I grew up idolizing weren't like that. That rather than relying on a cartoonish symbol to galvanize the righteousness of some morally binary sense of justice, my heroes grounded their pursuits in something with a little more social relevance, a little nuance and personality. And being an astute viewer, you're probably expecting that by drawing this divide, and by breaking this essay into 2 parts, I intend to blow your mind with the scalding hot take that saving the world and getting the girl are ultimately the same self-serving goal. An ego trip. I know, we'll get there. Wherein the actual goal is to watch the world pay dividends to your sense of cool by way of fear or love, culminating in a juvenile interpretation of what it means to be respected. And you're right, I just did it. Idolatry is bad. Hot take of the year. Mind blown. Now let's talk about some movies. So this is a good time to add an addendum of sorts to something I said in part 1. I said I don't like superheroes. But that doesn't mean that I've never liked a piece of art inspired by one. I have enjoyed isolated incidents within Suburbia, Heroesville, Cape Town. I grew up with movies like Mystery Men, which, by the way, is pretty similar to a script that Gunn also wrote for The Specials, but he didn't direct it, and I'm exploring films specifically under his creative control as much as that can be assumed, so this will be the only mention of it. And I'm not so jaded as to boycott a cinematic tentpole like The Dark Knight. Of course I love that movie. I read Watchmen in high school, and it turned me on to an entirely new, to me, art form in graphic novels. I probably never would have read the Mouse books or even know who Neil Gaiman is if it weren't for Alan Moore. I'm in no way condemning creative projects centered around superheroes. Duck Dodgers is a personal favorite. But there's a very important similarity shared by everything I've just mentioned, including Super. They all strip something vital away from the genre in order to highlight their commentary on it. Whether that something is spectacle, earnestness, or the lines between good and evil, these movies are designed in some way to not fit, to poke holes in something I never really liked in the first place. So it was pretty easy to fall in line with these movies. Guardians is different. I'm not saying it's devoid of commentary, because it ain't, but what it seems to be commenting on is a superhero genre that seemed to be stuck. Stuck trying to appeal to guys like me, whose only non-ironic superhero film they've ever liked was The Dark Knight. Guardians was a breath of fresh air, said every reviewer ever, because it chose to comment on the genre by just fucking winning at being a superhero blockbuster. It shies away from nothing tied to its audience's expectations and nails a blend of action, drama, and comedy. Though, to be fair, I still can't get fully on board with Drax's whole deal. Like, okay, alien races and junk, but this one can't understand metaphors. I don't know. It just seems like a clunky way to shoehorn in a comic relief character, but whatever. Maybe it's not my place. Alright, so I don't want to spend too much time on synopsis. You wouldn't have clicked on this video if you hadn't. You know what? Actually, no. I'm sorry. Comedy is subjective. Yes, but that doesn't mean that the impetus is on the viewer to appreciate it. If I don't get it, or just don't find it funny, then it's failed, right? Like, when's the last time that you saw a Jim Carrey movie and made excuses for it because 30% of the jokes relied on you finding his teeth funny? Elements that don't work take you out of the story, and that's nothing to apologize for. I won't do it. Anyway, synopsis aside, what I really want to talk about with this movie is setting. And it's such a simple trick. Set it in space. It's kind of the whole reason this movie works for me being someone who needed a reason. And I know that this wasn't Gunn's decision, obviously, but it was the adaptive fiddle he decided to play, so Let's take a listen. In Gunn's version, Peter's mother is not killed by a rogue crew of space soldiers disobeying orders from Peter's real father, a space emperor, like in the comics. She gets cancer. Yeah, I know. We'll get there. Peter still gets in fights at school as a child, but unlike the comics where he's fighting off bullies, he is now protecting innocence.
Why have you been fighting with the other boys again, baby?
They killed a little frog that ain't done nothing.
Frogs, to be exact. And instead of escaping his mother's killers, going to live in an orphanage, and eventually work at NASA under his mother's friend Lisa Chang, the NASA commander's command, he's scooped up immediately after making his most tragic mistake. Now, you don't have to know that these are changes to the canon in order to appreciate the scene that Gunn is setting, but I'm pointing them out here to illustrate that his hand is the one stirring the pot, creating something new. Because now, what we are watching is a kid whose mother's death leaves him no tangible revenges, no new father to go searching for, just the knowledge that he failed her in her final moment and can never, ever take that back. And in that moment, as little Peter screams for his mother and the audience begins to murmur about space and music and bright colors, all the things that we were promised that the first 4 minutes refused to deliver, we're off. Off and running, it seems, yes, but off kilter, it seems, is the sense of things. We want to just shut up and watch the pretty colors. But there's a fly in that Chardonnay. And isn't it ironic? Well, yeah, actually, this time. Because we see mere seconds of movie time later that this is exactly what Peter did. After the death of his mother and his subsequent abduction, Peter receded fully into two things: space and pop culture. Neon adventures set to the soundtrack of his mother's love. And what a breath of fresh air it must have been. What a very real response to this kind of trauma for this kind of very real kid. He wanted to be a hero down on sad, boring old Earth, but up here, where the colors are brighter and morality seems to take a back seat to politics and thieves' codes, he doesn't have to be. So he isn't. And part of me is really tempted to take this a giant step further and speculate that the whole movie, starting with the abduction, is in Peter's head, that his escape from his mother's death is literally into comic books, and like the third movie will end with Chris Pratt as grown-up Peter shutting the book and finally asking out the girl he works with at Blockbuster Video, played by Zoe Saldana wearing an emerald necklace or something. I won't do that, but I will point out that the ship that picks him up is shaped like an open comic book. I'm just saying. But that aside, accepting the events as they are portrayed means appreciating the fact that Peter's motivation is exactly opposite to being a hero. He's no longer saving frogs from crushing bully feet, but kicking them himself in 4-4 time. In the world he lives in, that exciting new air we paid $700 million to breathe deep in theaters is exactly the reason why. And not just at the beginning of the story, like the beginning of an arc or something he will overcome. I'm saying there are no heroes here, super or otherwise. Not Peter, not his friends, nor anywhere else in the freaking galaxy. Because this movie is not about heroes. Not really. It's about self-awareness. The self-awareness of its characters, realizing that charming rogues and brooding loners do not complete people make. Just as on a slightly more meta level, revenge, combat prowess, and even that exalted truism, self-sacrifice, do not true heroes make. It's about the self-awareness of a genre that's perhaps forgotten how to live in spectacle, but survive and adapt in meaning and relevance. The The decisions you make and the actions you take are secondary to who you are. And that's the trick. We live in a world that is obsessed with reevaluation. We satirize ourselves, our parents, our neighbors for being duped by false idols, and hopefully do it with an ambition to establish a new, less penetrable hierarchy of heroes, a freshly jumbled tapestry of who we've been to read more comfortably into who we are. But this movie's ambition is not to redefine history or its heroes. It doesn't have to. Instead, it gets to invent them from the inside out. Because there are no heroes here. Not yet.
If I lose myself, I lose it all. If I lose myself, I lose it all.
There is an unbridled optimism at the core of this film, whose last scene will always look like this to me, because wiping the tears from my glasses during this goddamn song is just so futile that I discard them every time it starts. An optimism that is reprised within this song as a crescendo of support to the one thing this film hopes that you walk away truly inspired to understand. You are not alone. And if you're thinking that that is a mighty simple idea, hardly worthy of such grand notation, consider that in my best attempt to actively and objectively absorb a small fraction of a single artist's body of work, it has taken me about 4,100 words to get to this point. Because it may be a simple idea. You may glance at a poster on the wall of your dentist's office and think, "Aw, that's nice." Because it is not a difficult series of words, but to discover it, to own it, and realize that try as you may to incarcerate yourself in self-reliance and the pursuit of personally accumulated thoughts and philosophies, you are not alone, can be a dizzying proposition. Daunting. Unnecessary. Empathy can hurt. It is a double-edged sword that can be manipulated, weaponized, shared, or forgotten. But it will always be the deciding factor in one's determination of the hero and the villain, human and inhuman. Or rather, this being a rainbow-spectacled space alien soap opera, I'll modify that to fit. And this movie really wears its empathy badge right on its sleeve. I mean, look at Mantis. She wields the power of empathy like a superpower, but has no concept of its potential because she's spent her life in the servitude of a man who manipulates and weaponizes it to bring about the death of just so many of his lovers and children, and then also uses it to help him sleep at night. That is some serious metaphorical dust there, Mr. Gunn. But beyond that, every single character's arc in this film is to learn empathy for another character. Peter and Gamora, Gamora and Nebula, Rocket and Yondu, Yondu and Peter, Peter and Rocket. Everyone gets ample screen time devoted to these pairings because each pair needs to work their way gradually and organically to meet the other somewhere in the middle and realize you are not alone.
Well, of course not.
Other than Baby Groot, who is a baby, the only main character who doesn't learn a lesson drenched in other people's feelings sauce is Drax, whose issue is not that he lacks empathy, but that he lacks the ability to express it in an outright way befitting his surroundings, which is why he's paired up with Mantis. But, I mean, at least he's starting to come around on those metaphors. He's even starting to get in on the jokes. Oh, son of a bitch. I'm Drax? What the hell, James? What, you couldn't write a superhero film with the intention of reestablishing the core of the genre's appeal so as to supplant interpretive ambiguity with actual script-level context in order to both tear down and celebrate the very notion of a superhero role model for young people without making your most annoyingly genre-tropic character a stand-in for the guy who doesn't get it?
That is called a practical joke.
Actually, that makes a lot of sense. Good job. I suppose the presumption that the stand-in character in any film that frames its protagonist as the symbol of any kind of ideal is a pretty flawed presumption. I suppose idolizing a fictional character is perhaps exactly the reason that one cannot be that character. Maybe learning that lesson is just something you have to do as you grow up and recontextualize your childhood heroes. And I suppose that the symbol and the binary moralism and the pomp and spectacle makes things a little less messy and confusing during that transition. Maybe, maybe that's what James Gunn was trying to get at with the whole Drax thing. Maybe he was leaning into an audience of people like me who, oh, no, movies have been doing this forever. It just took a cheesy literalizing of the guy who doesn't get it to make me realize that I'm the guy who doesn't get it. I'm a little embarrassed now, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. James Gunn is a filmmaker who is not afraid to make choices, deliberate and focused choices that throughout his career have become more and more representative of what he intends for his films to say. Why do we tell superhero stories in a world full of humans? Ego is not Peter's dad in the comics. You probably already knew that, but I want to go out on this point because I think it's a choice that has a lot more behind it than just convenience and plot consolidation. Ego is a character for whom the trappings of humanity are useful, a set of tools and plastic accoutrement to be manipulated, mastered, and eventually smeared across his big non-face in an effort to gain empathy, to use his mastery of literalizing his notion of humanity to establish the trust and even idolatry of those he intends to annihilate on his quest to take his superiorness to its logical conclusion. Why be a superhero in a world full of humans? Ego says the answer is not to be a hero or a guardian or even a ruler of a universe, but instead to become the universe. And Peter, being made partly of the same stuff, is more than a little taken by the beauty of that logic, ready and willing to succumb to the temptation of his natural ends until the confrontation of his idolatry and his humanity present him with a new, unique conundrum. Why be human in a world full of superheroes? A decade ago, Gunn's answer was something like, well, they both kind of suck, so let's just blow some shit up, make it colorful, and enjoy the show. But now, and by now I mean here in this moment, because God only knows how recent events have reshaped the man's sensibilities towards humans and superheroes. Now the message comes with a little more social relevance, a little nuance and personality. Maybe heroes don't need to be colorful fantasy versions of our primitive egos. Maybe our symbols can be created with something more behind them than just a singular vision of national pride or emotionally driven justice. Maybe the enemies we fight in our stories needn't be so externalized so as to evoke imagery of wars fought and won, of evils so broadly called out, but of the internal struggles so broadly dampened by the very symbols that we cling to for absolution by association. Maybe before we so readily declare that we are deserving of a stand-in protagonist who is a hero, a partner, a parent, or a friend, we should be concerned about our very need for this impossibly perfect doppelganger. Why be human in a world full of superheroes? Because if villainy and heroism are only defined by our respective understandings of how they pertain to humanity, maybe that's the term that we should be focused on defining first.